Welcome back, everyone. We are happy to have you. We're going to get started on our next presentation. And our presenters are going to turn on their cameras and join in here. And while they're doing that, I'm going to start introducing them. So we want to welcome Dr. Dixon, who is a board certified behavior analyst at the doctorate level and a clinical professor at the Department of Disability and Human Development. Dr. Dixon has published 12 books, over 230 peer-reviewed journal articles, and delivered thousands of presentations around the globe. His research or expert opinions have been featured in Time Magazine, Newsweek, the New York Times, National Public Radio, The American Life, and Netflix series Bill Nye Saves the World. Dr. Dixon cares for individuals and their families impacted by autism and other developmental disabilities through his innovative research that guides practice. He has generated millions of dollars of funding to infuse behavior analysis within local schools and treatment facilities and created multiple clinics for persons diagnosed with autism and related conditions. We also have Jessica Hinman here. She's a board certified behavior analyst that has 6 years of experience working with children and adolescents and young adults with disabilities. And her research interests include mindfulness-based therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, and evidence-based practices for individuals with autism. She's currently a doctoral student at UIC. And then last but not least, we have Chu Hoi Yi, who is a board certified behavior analyst that is dedicated to improving equal access to evidence-based treatment among minority groups and is interested in improving language, adaptive skills, and overall independence among those with autism he works with. He is also currently a doctoral student at UIC. Welcome all, we're so happy to have you. And I'm going to let you all take it away from here.
All right, well, thank you. I'm Mark. I'm going to go first here. The three of us are going to share the delivery of this presentation. It is a product of our joint efforts together, and hopefully deliver a three-person yet one comprehensive, exciting presentation for you over the next hour. Again, we're going to be speaking about how language can be improved in persons with autism, utilizing behavior analytic approaches, as well as cognition skills. However, we're going to push, I think, the definition of what we talk about is applied behavior analysis and its treatment approach, and it highlighted some of the work that we're doing at UIC. So, we do face challenges within this field of ABA. I just came across an article today how the Department of Defense and their TRICARE reimbursement is for behavior analysis being called into question because of the fact that we're not showing or demonstrating large outcomes for kids, and that is concerning. And when we look at the past of, and in many cases, the present of what is going on in our intervention, it is considerably dominated by early skills, early intervention, and very basic beginning conversation and receptive skills. Now that's great. I mean, we definitely need to be doing that kind of work. However, if we look at the kind of the lifespan of an individual with autism, we have to make sure that our utility as a field doesn't just kind of end, once some of these early on gaps have been closed. Another challenge that we face is that oftentimes we don't see the interconnection between skill acquisition and skill reduction or behavior reduction. And that can be a concern because if we have kind of two silos of intervention, one in which we're working on behavior plans, second silo is teaching new skills. it's possible that we're missing the integration but that these repertoires actually do have with an individual person. And then finally, oftentimes what we do is we write goals and objectives, and we hopefully make those goals and objectives, and we consider ourselves successful. And that's fine, but there's a whole world of millions of goals that we're all going to need to encounter, and try to attain at some point in our lives. And we surely don't have enough time for intervention to do so. So at some point, we're going to need to move towards these kind of individual targets, towards a more comprehensive intervention procedure that can have wide rippling effects, I believe. And so, where the future is taking us is where our interventions are not necessarily just limited to the skills that are taught, but rather they have global impact. And also to, consider the scalability of the type of work that we do, and how the majority of intervention is done in one-on-one settings, which is great, but also to consider how that technology might be adapted to large classrooms of kids, small groups of individuals that are kind of at that same approximate level for intervention. And also, how do we trickle this content into parent facilitated treatment? And again, this is more than just parent coaching on basic techniques, but how do you actually take those 20 hours a week, or 15 hours a week you have for intervention, and transfer the technology over to the parents so that it infuses the rest of that child's week. And finally, and this is a cute sounding little phrase, but it really means a lot, and that's teaching these kids how to learn and not what to learn. And that means something, because again, we can't just get a laundry list of skills and hope that totality equals a inclusive life, but rather what we're going to need to do is work on interventions that have these rippling effects, and much broader than just generalization effects, but these overarching effects on maybe building a different way to think. And I feel that those are very bold things to say here on the slide, but through the support that TAP has given us over the years, and the research that we've been able to put together, I think we've come close to being able to kind of prove that this stuff actually does matter, and it does have these larger global outcomes for kids. Next slide. So, what we're doing at UIC is trying to practice what I'm preaching, in which we have a clinic that has a variety of appendages to it that focus on a dynamic, complex, multidisciplinary system, and where we are trying to emphasize that little saying on that last slide of teaching how to learn, not what to learn. And by doing so, I feel that we've been able to accomplish some pretty important things. Our focus is this integration of skill acquisition and behavior reduction, and how one interacts with the other. And the more that we can accelerate learning of a certain type, which I'll show you in the next few slides, the more that we're going to see concurrent reductions in challenging behaviors, as well as a little bit more of a global understanding of the social emotional world that surrounds that individual child. Next. So what kind of sits at our core in terms of intervention is that we need, we kind of believe that there's limitations in the published literature, and that science doesn't end the day we get our degrees, or science doesn't end once we develop our own kind of treatment procedures for prevention. Rather, what we need to do, for better or worse, is constantly go back to the literature, see how it's evolving, see where the gaps are, and be real sensitive to where the gaps are from the science to the technology, or where the clinical care is happening, and where those deficits are. We need to make sure that we're doing science in clinical practice to help inform other clinicians as to what they can do as well. And by doing this, I believe that we can close the gap between what those those researchers do and those journal articles nobody wants to read, and the things that you guys have to do on the front line. And by doing so, it can make all the difference in terms of outcomes for kids. Next. So let me give you an example of a very, this is a very sterile, generic example, but it's I think kind of clear to understand. So within the world of that that we're operating in, this behavioral world, we have this idea or conceptualization of antecedents, behaviors, and consequences, and that if we arrange various consequences to occur following the presentation of a certain behavior, we can increase the probability of those behaviors in the future, and certain antecedents will be more likely to occasion those behaviors when followed by certain consequences. So what does that all mean in practice? Well, if I was to present a flashcard to a child and say, what is this? And we see this weird looking critter on the slide, and with no response from the child, I might say, this is a frog. Child makes an echoing response. It's a frog. I deliver some sort of, reinforcer to the child or some consequence, and it could be verbal praise, a variety of individualized idiosyncratic reinforcers. So over time, in the presence of that image and my vocal utterance, what is this? I will increase the probability of the child saying frog if it's followed by, if that vocalization is followed by things that are preferred to the child. That's great. We built an entire science on that kind of basic paradigm. We can teach numbers and letters, colors, and feature function classes, and a whole variety of things utilizing that various paradigm. But the question remains, when you teach like that, what is the spread of the effect? And so some of that spread is based on the formal properties of the critter. So in that image there, we got this green looking thing on the image. And maybe it can transfer to other green looking things with big eyes and a frog looking stuff to it, like the stuffed frog. Can it be reversed, however? So now, if I teach the vocalization, can I get the selection-based response in the presence of a variety of images that don't necessarily share identical formal similarity to the frog image that I originally trained? Can I get a selection-based response? So that would be the second little example there. Show me the frog. Where is it? How do you make that adaptation? And then, I'm thinking something that has 4 legs, no tail, loves to eat bugs. How do you kind of get that classification of this critter to be able to answer these kind of conversational type questions? Or if I was to ask the child, how are you like a frog? I think all of us could probably answer it. Well, I've got 2 eyes, I've got these leg things, we've got these, I think these arms, maybe they're like the frog legs. Sometimes I go ribbit when I'm looking for flies. There's a variety of things, or maybe that's just me that does that. So there's, a variety of contexts there that, yeah, you can train all that stuff, but man, that's a lot just for a frog, and we got a lot more things out there to teach than all this. And is there a way that we can get some of these things to kind of emerge or to be generative from the child based on a prior learning history? Next slide. So this concept has been evolving over the last 10 years or so, really, when it comes to practice, and maybe another 10 before that in our scientific journals, around this phrase called relational learning, meaning that if I can teach a concept to the child as their therapist, can I see connections amongst very similar and somewhat dissimilar concepts that can emerge in the absence of any direct treatment? Meaning, like, can my ABA treatment actually have ripple over effects into new areas that are not based necessarily on just generalizing the way that I trained it? And, if we think about how this stuff might mirror how we learn and how we learned in school, could we have the same, can we build capacities that kind of mimic the way that we were taught? Because nobody taught us to, one at a time, in a discrete format, everything that we've come to learn about the world. At some point, we've kind of extrapolated that information and built cognitive capacity. And what we've been seeing in the research literature outside of autism, and starting to see it now in autism, is that, when we look at the effects of this type of treatment, it's bold and it's broad and it has large scale impacts on the clients that were used in the studies. And we'll showcase some of that today. So let me just give you a real basic example of how this might work. So again, I got another critter on the screen, this time a ladybug. And so in this basic kind of paradigm, you see an image might be trained to be the same as text, and then the text could be trained to a vocalization. So I could say, you know, in the presence of the image with a variety of text flashcards on the table, which one is the bug, or I could just say put with the same, and then through trial and error and reinforcement, we can get a selection to the BUG text. And then if I was to take that text and say, what is this, and present that as an image to the child over trial and error and maybe some prompting, I could get the vocalization bug. So if I just did those two things, what this paradigm of relational learning suggests is that I should be able to get the emergence of everything else you see in those open arrows. And, you know, at its most primitive form, if I could train two things and get four for free, that means I'm going to accelerate learning by at least 200% on concepts that I did not necessarily directly need to train. So to me, I don't know, you know, we never seem to have enough hours and time with our kids. And so if we could maximize the efficiency of what we do, and nothing else, if we could just build efficiency this way, what a great outcome that could be. You know, when I got into this game 20 years ago or so, what was perplexing to me is this paradigm you see here on the screen was not being utilized by every BCBA in the world, because we've known about this type of learning in the basic science since 1970. And for some reason, there's been this gap there. And so, you know, as you guys interact with you know, BCBAs, and maybe you are some yourselves, you know, ask why are we not doing this type of work when this type of work is clearly more efficient than training every single one of those things independently. Next. And it goes more than just making sense of the world with equalness. So in that case, the picture was equal to the word and the word was equal to the text. And we get these inferences around concepts. Well, we can do this with a variety of different paradigms beside equal. So we could do difference and comparison and opposites and hierarchies and various ways of perspective taking. And when you look at all these different kind of configurations we can make with the images and the concepts that make up a child's day, you can start seeing that a variety of really cool things happening, such as like more of a shift towards intrinsic motivation. Like they don't care about our prompts and reinforcers and praise and cookies and all that stuff. They just like to learn. I mean, gosh, what a wonderful opportunity that could be. So here we have another paradigm. So we have again, I'm going to kind of skim through these things here, but, you know, just teaching, you know, frog is the same as image. Frog is, you know, says ribbit. What does the image say? And you can get that inference to occur. And we can get even more expansions, or what we call transformations of this, you know, by configuring our training trials appropriately. So here's another one too. You know, where does one of the biggest deficits in children with autism is this lack of kind of social emotional awareness, you know, theory of mind, you know, compassion, you know, just all of the, you know, reading fluency is fantastic. Reading comprehension is falling behind. Where does that stuff begin, and where do you start building it? Well, you know, we've done, I don't know, maybe 10 years of work in this area showing that it comes from this beginning of kind of understanding how to frame perspectives and utilizing these relational procedures to get to those kind of understandings of the world around you. So in this example here, we'll skip the schematics, but at the image there, you know, I might have, you know, something like this, and I say, okay, what does the boy see? What does the girl see? You know, there's the wall. If you were the girl, what would you see? If you were the boy, what would the boy see? Or what would you see? If the girl was the boy and the boy was the girl, what would the boy see? If you were the boy and the boy was the girl? And I mean, we can play with this in a variety of ways. If the chicken was a frog and the frog was a chicken, what does the girl see? And we can start playing with all these very basic kind of flips of perspective. Now we can do this obviously with an image. We could do it with real stimuli, you know, in picture or animals and in in the classroom and we hide them one behind a wall, or we have, I'm holding one inside of a basket. Yeah, I mean, there's a variety of ways to kind of spin on this basic kind of preparation. And the effects are clear. Next slide. And again, we can just constantly expand this stuff from, here we have vocalizations. We might train them to picture stimuli, and then we train vocalizations to text stimuli. We train vocalizations to sign language. And then you can see training just 3 different kind of correspondences here between A, B, C, and D. We can get the emergence of all those various dotted arrows, which result in 13 different types of new unlearned skills that they have then generated on their own without the necessity of ABA intervention. So, a question that I often ask people is, how much time do you want to waste when you've got an entire world to try to bring, into the awareness and understanding of these children. And if we have technology to do this quicker, let's do it. So one study that we did, and this was in part supported by TAP funding, was that we brought kids in and we assigned them to either a wait list where they just waited for intervention, because we had tons of kids signing up. We did traditional ABA, which was kind of that, left side of the slide at the beginning of my part of the talk today. And then we had this other cluster of kids, what we call comprehensive ABA, where we took all this technology and these new things that I've been talking about and introduced those things to the kids as well. Each child got approximately 4 hours of intervention per week, so there's very small doses of treatment. And we gave them an IQ test at the beginning of intervention and then at the end of intervention. Again, those waitlist kids just got the 2 IQ tests and no intervention. And this took place over a period of about 8 to 10 weeks. So it wasn't a long period of time. What we can see here in this slide is that the traditional versus comprehensive group, in the comprehensive group, more skills were mastered. Compared to the traditional group, there's no baseline or treatment, no control group listed because no skills were being mastered during those 4 hours of intervention. Next slide, please. But the most important thing here is that when we look at full-scale IQ changes, which is on the y-axis, and the 3 groups of intervention, or 3 groups of kids to intervention, the traditional and comprehensive versus control group, you can see that full-scale IQ changes for most kids that are getting any kind of ABA. Now, this is great. I mean, 4 hours of ABA changes IQ points in a positive direction. After just 8 weeks, 4 hours of intervention per week, that's pretty exciting to me. Again, a global index of efficacy of ABA. However, not all ABA interventions appear to be equal. That comprehensive group, doing the things that I've just been walking through with you with bugs and frogs, suggests that no kid remained at baseline levels of what their IQ test was, and actually the treatment group accelerated at greater degrees than the traditional group, as well as a control group. The control group is there just kind of looking at, test, retest effects of administering a test like this over a short period of time. So we do seem to have an effect here. And this is, again, a study with small numbers of kids, small amount of intervention, small number of treatment weeks, but we've expanded upon that in weeks ahead and in the research. So let me turn it over to John, who's going to talk about the next study we did.
Thank you, Dr. Dixon. So building upon what we found back in 2019, and then we seek to expand the number of participants in the study and just to replicate the effect to see, can we get the same result with a larger sample size? So what we did is that we have 60 children in the school district in the special ed program, and we randomly assigned 32 of them into this relational training group where they'll be exposed to ABA curriculum instructions that is similar to what Dr. Dixon was introducing in the beginning, which relational training, focus on problem solving, concept formation, abstract concept, etc. And we have the remaining 28 students continue to their treatment as usual to receive special ed services that are delivered by the school district. And the relational training that these 32 children in the relational training group receive covers all of those 6 relations that we mentioned earlier: sameness, opposition, hierarchy, comparison, difference, and also this didactic or perspective taking. And throughout the course of the study, they received 6 hours of therapy every week. And the whole study lasted to 6 to 9 weeks. And all the treatment are provided by paraprofessionals or district autism team. And again, we use a similar type of measure setup where we measure everyone at the baseline level, and then we measure everyone's treatment outcome again once they exit the study. So what we found is that these new type of ABA teaching with relational training component can produce skill acquisition, just like the good old-fashioned ABA. But what we see here on the graph, the first and second graph, is a before and after within each group. So we can see, yes, their behavioral skill does increase before and after the treatment. But what is more interesting is that it seems that for every student in the relational training group, they seem to be able to make more gains compared with those in the treatment as usual group. And that kind of makes sense because as we arrange instruction in this particular way, we are promoting derivation of these untaught skills. So learning no longer only happens by contingency. Now I've taught A to B, A is the same as B, and B is the same as A. The individual will be able to derivate A is the same as C. So we see more skill emerge over the same period of time. What we also see is some similar effect as we observed in the 2019 study, where we compared the global level functioning change measured by full score IQ scores. And what we see here is that although both groups are making behavioral skill progress, meaning that they are learning new behavior skills, it seems that only individuals in the relational training groups show global level changes by scoring higher on their IQ test. However, everyone in the treatment as usual group, although they're making behavior skill gains, their IQ measure does not show a statistically significant difference before and after the 6 to 9 weeks of treatment. And again, IQ is the abstract concept, but it does, because it's significantly correlated with multiple areas of outcome measures, we use that as kind of an index to see how likely are we to produce significant global level change. To aid in that interpretation, we also took their violence score before and after the treatment. And what we see here is that in the same direction as the IQ score results suggest, those in the relational training groups are able to produce significant change in their VABS score. However, for folks in the treatment as usual group, although their behavior skills that were directly targeted in the treatment does show improve, we don't see this overall increase in functionings generalized into other domains that haven't been directly targeted in our treatment. The other thing that we noticed is on symptoms of autism or challenging behaviors that are usually associated with this diagnosis. So we use two measures to capture this, the CARS and the PDDBI. And here we can see the result of CARS. And again, we have the relational training group, the treatment as usual group, and the comparison of CARS change score between these two groups. And what we see here is that for people enrolled in the relational training groups, we actually see a statistically significant decrease on their CARS scores, meaning that overall, the identified symptoms of autism before and after this 6 to 9 weeks of treatment has been reduced. However, we do not see similar outcome among the treatment as usual group. And the same result was replicated using the PDDBI measure. We see a reduction in autism symptoms following 9 weeks of intervention among the relational training groups, but we don't see the same effect among the treatment as usual group. And again, all these results taken together kind of hinted at that relational training is able to produce change at a different level. If we teach each skill by using DTT or based on memorization, essentially, yes, we can teach these behavior skills effectively to the child. However, like Dr. Dixon was mentioned earlier, we can't just put lots of skills on a whole laundry list and just go through them one by one. We need to strive a way that can produce global level of change more effectively. And with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Jessie, who is going to talk about the next section of our presentation.
Thanks, John. So yeah, up until this point, we've focused a lot on skill development, especially specifically for younger individuals with autism. And now we're going to kind of switch gear and focus more so on social emotional development, self-management, And some of those, skills that we teach are adolescents or young adults or even children as well. And the way that we do this is through, we still use that behavior analytic approach to teach those social emotional skills. And we do this by teaching acceptance, teaching individual self-management. We also really focus a lot on or determining value-based goals and kind of setting those goals for themselves. Present moment awareness and mindfulness is a very big aspect of that we really focus on, as well as flexible perspective taking and kind of introducing, the idea of considering others' emotions and considering your own emotions around others and things of that nature. So that's what we're going to kind of focus on moving forward here. So really, there are two different approaches to teaching self-management. There is this more traditional approach, which many behavior analysts still use today, but it focuses more so on suppressing bad thoughts and kind of just teaching this idea that, bad things should be avoided, they should be suppressed. If it doesn't make you happy, don't do it. It also focuses on things like changing the thoughts that you have. Maybe stop making rules for yourself. Things like, oh, well, just be happy. Think happy thoughts, think happy thoughts instead of negative thoughts, things of that nature. And also kind of teaching individuals to find alternative ways to minimize contact with those things that are making them unhappy or upset or uncomfortable. So, if you aren't enjoying the people that you're around, make new friends and just kind of avoid the problem. However, when we're looking through this, more traditional approach, some of those things aren't always feasible and they may not be the most effective or efficient way to operate. So we kind of take this mindfulness and acceptance-based approach. And rather than teaching, bad thoughts and bad things are to be suppressed and avoided, we kind of teach individuals that, it's okay to have bad thoughts. It's okay to have situations and events that maybe you don't enjoy. But rather than trying to avoid them or suppress them or make them go away, we kind of just accept them for what they are and, continue to focus on our values and move forward in that fashion. And rather than, trying to change our thoughts, which I've never been able to do, I try really hard and it's still not worked for me. But rather than trying to change our thoughts, we're kind of just letting our thoughts be there and learning to interact with them a little bit differently. So, rather than having certain thoughts that might, lead to us doing maybe some sort of behavior that might not be that adaptive or helpful in the long run, we're just going to kind of notice that we're having those thoughts and, not always following through a self-rule that we have for ourselves and doing something, again, that moves us closer towards those values. And again, really focusing on teaching individuals about values and the reinforcers within their own life. And that's really, a big part of the behavior analytic part of this is teaching individuals, how to identify what's important to them and how they can achieve and kind of contact those things in their own life. And we do really, focus on, long-term reinforcers. So kind of moving away from I do a thing and I get good stuff right away to teaching the skill of, we're doing these things that might not always be enjoyable because in the long run, they're eventually going to pay off and lead to that big reinforcer that's, really important to you based on what, you've told me. So that's kind of, how we're approaching the self-management skill. And I'll kind of go through that a little bit more in detail on the next slide here. Perfect. So how do we integrate mindfulness-based practice into our approach? We use kind of these different, these few different approaches. Again, like I said, we really emphasize that acceptance piece. So instead of saying things like, well, we can't always get what we want, things happen, we might say things to those that we're working with, like, well, let's just kind of accept that things are different than what we wanted them to be and keep working to move forward. Same thing with focusing on the present moment. I mean, I know many of us focus on things that have happened in the past, or we're worried about things that might happen in the future. So rather than saying things like, oh, stop worrying about that so much right now, or, that's tomorrow, don't worry about that. we might just prompt individuals to be right here, right now, and notice, how their body feels in space where they are currently. And being okay with the fact that our mind wanders, because all of our mind wanders, but being able to kind of gently redirect our attention when we do notice it starting to wander. Then we move on to this piece of values-based behavior change. And this is a really, really big, important piece, like I said. So again, we're teaching individuals to find, what's important to them, what they value, what's meaningful to them. And then we teach them how to get those things and work in that direction. So oftentimes, we might hear things like, well, you're not going to go to recess if you're not behaving, or you're not going to get this unless you do this. But we can kind of flip how we, take that approach and say things like, I know you really enjoy your free time. That's something that's very important to you. But, we need to kind of finish working in order to get that free time, because, not working, not, completing our work is just kind of moving us further away from that free time. And the more we work, the closer we'll get to that free time. But, of course, some individuals, I think we can all probably relate to this, sometimes we need to start small. It might take me a really long time to figure out that doing my homework today is going to lead me to being a veterinarian in 6 or 10 years down the road. That's a really long way away. So instead of saying things like, well, first you need to do this, 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 and this, and then this to go to recess, we're going to really start by breaking it down. So, hey, we have a lot of things to do, but let's start with this, and then we'll move to this. And then we'll figure out where we need to go from there, because that's really feasible and, efficient and in the present moment that we can focus on. And then that kind of aspect of flexible perspective taking is really emphasized with this positive sense of self. Oftentimes, and I've heard it from many individuals I've worked with. I've even, said it about myself of like, oh, don't think that, you're not that, or, you really messed up today, you're not a good student. Like, that's not true. How easy is it to say, that's not true about you, don't believe that. Well, sometimes it feels really real to feel those things, and to be told like, oh, that's not true, can sometimes be a little bit invalidating. So we really work on this positive sense of self that focuses on, having those thoughts are normal, they're okay, but let's notice that they're just thoughts. So for example, we might say like, wow, dumb is just a word that sometimes we might think about ourselves, but you're Bobby, and Bobby can finish this worksheet. And Bobby finds this important, so let's keep going. And that's really kind of how we emphasize that piece as well. And we have done quite a bit of research on this, and it's actually shown some really cool results. Next slide, please. So in one such study that we did, we used this sort of approach to teach self-management skills and reduce challenging behavior in individuals with autism. So in this particular study, we were using relational training, as Dr. Dixon and John kind of previously touched on, but we were also teaching the self-management skill, this mindfulness-based skill, using self-management intervention along with relational training to reduce challenging behaviors. And as you can kind of see here from these 3 individuals, after we introduce that self-management, we see challenging behavior drop off quite a bit. And these were now all individuals who, were very vocal and, were able to kind of do these skills, but we saw that by adding it into that relational training intervention, it had really, really positive effects, which is really, really neat to see. And we also saw the engagement during sessions increase as well, which was cool. Next slide, please. And now that really is kind of a new area that we're starting to explore, and kind of continuing on with our conversation of just new innovative types of research that we're doing within this realm, kind of brings us to this kind of new thing that we've started doing, and it's really, really neat. But we've started doing some research looking at neuromarkers of individuals with autism. So in this one particular study, which I'll go through in just a bit here, we were looking at the relationship between ocular observing responses, so eye contact looking at a task, and relational training procedures for children with autism. And we, this is the device that we used here, this Tobii Pro, and it's really neat. It kind of sticks onto the bottom of the computer and it tracks eye gaze. So as you're looking at different things on the screen, it's marking where your eyes go, which is a really interesting thing to look at, especially with, this population that we know often struggles with, social skills such as eye fixation and eye gaze and eye contact and attending to different social cues. So that's really what we were looking at within this series of studies. And we had a few different questions here related to these studies. Next slide, please. So, first we were kind of looking at, does behavior analysis have an impact at the neurological level? And if so, what are the advantages? Like I said, we know that eye gaze can be a challenge for individuals with autism, but we don't really measure it, right? Sometimes we may do programs like Look at Me and have the individual look at, our eyes and make that eye contact. But other than that, we're not really measuring it in any sort of way. So this allowed us to do that. And we also wanted to see, can, ABA and relational responding improve eye gaze in this population? And if so, what does that mean? If we don't directly train it and we see it improve, that could have some pretty big clinical significance. So our first step is to, of course, measure, what does the eye gaze look like? And then we want to improve it to see if we can make a change, and then determine if relational training, in fact, can improve eye gaze. And here's some of the results that we found in that study. Next slide, please. Perfect. So the first study in kind of this series of studies here that we had was, again, just looking at eye gaze related to derived relational responding. And we measured that using average fixation duration and average fixation rate. So how much were they looking at the stimuli that we were presenting them during derived relational responding tasks? And as we can see, there is a significant correlation between the skill level in derived relational responding and eye gaze. So as we see those derived relational responding scores go up, we also see eye gaze increase as well. So that was kind of our first finding, which was really cool to see. And then we go into our second study of, this set of studies. And on this one, we started using relational training to see if there was any effect on fixation, duration, and rate towards the target stimuli that we were teaching. And as you can see, on the left side of each graph, we have our baseline. So before we even started any sort of intervention, we can see across all 4 participants that it was much lower. And then once we introduced the treatment, we see that average fixation rate, so that eye gaze, increases pretty significantly. So based on this data, we're able to say that relational training did produce significant increased fixation duration when we're running these things, which is, again, really, really cool. And that brings us to kind of our third and final study within this series. A lot of pictures here, and this one was definitely a fun one to be a part of. But as you can see, we had kind of these 3 different natural environment videos that we recorded, and they were categorized in 3 different ways. So we had videos of a person telling a story. We had 3 videos of 2 individuals having a conversation, and then 3 videos of an individual engaging in social imaginative play. And as you can see on the screen, each video has some colorful circles. So in the person telling a story, there's a lot of color on the individual's faces. In the middle category, there's colored circles on both individuals' faces. And on the social imaginative play, we see those circles or those targets on the person's face and the things that they are playing with. And we were looking at kind of the eye gaze towards the area of interest in each of these different vignettes or these different videos. And we were really trying to see, like, okay, when individuals are watching somebody tell a story, where is their eye gaze? Is it looking at kind of these distractor stimuli that we have? Like you can see in all of those videos, there's a lot going on. There's stuff on the walls, there's things on the tables, there's things in the background behind the individuals. There's a lot going on. So we wanted to see, how much are they looking at the target that, most individuals would likely look at during these sorts of scenes, or are they looking elsewhere? So that's essentially what we were looking at with this study. And here's some of the data that we collected for that one. So as you can see, we'll start with kind of the graph on the left. So people telling stories. And on each graph on the bottom, you see 3 different groups. So RT stands for that relational training group. DC is our direct training control. So that would be more of a traditional ABA approach, not doing the relational training. And then the WC group is a waitlist control. So they were receiving no intervention at all, nothing. And as you can kind of see, there is some differentiation between the 3 different categories. As you can see with people telling stories, not much change between the 3 groups. The relational training group's a little bit higher, but not too much. But where we really see the difference is within this conversation piece. The relational training group is quite a bit higher than the other 2 groups. And then that social imaginative play, not much differentiation as well over there. And ultimately what we can kind of conclude from this data is that, conversations, that's the one area where there is some sort of social interaction, whereas the other 2, a little bit less so. So that may be the possibility for that data as well. But again, really cool stuff and kind of a new and innovative way of, looking at some of the skills that we are teaching and some of the skills that we're not teaching, but that we see emerge through this relational training and kind of measuring it in just a new and a really cool way. Like I said, it was really kind of a fun study to see conducted and be a part of and, kind of play around with that technology. So really cool stuff. And I think I'm going to hand it back over to John to talk a little bit about what we're kind of planning moving forward from here.
All right, thank you, Jesse. So like what we've been talking about today, I mean, the science and the foundation of ABA can really be expanded into lots of the avenues that haven't really traditionally been explored in a clinical setting. And with the support of TAP, with the university and department, we'd like to keep expanding the capacity at CBM so that we have the capacity to directly impacting more lives of this clinical population, so that we can produce more global level of change and really teaching them how to learn instead of focusing on what to learn. And the other thing that we've been focusing on is to finalizing an RBT training curriculum that can be accessed statewide. And what we really want to do here is to kind of preach what we do, to kind of introduce this idea of relational learning and how to arrange your teaching in a way that maximizes the benefit of the learner, so that we can really start to kind of disseminate this relational training piece so that more and more individuals can access to this more contemporary and more modern way of teaching language and cognitive abilities, to kind of gradually reduce the presence of simply contingency-based learning and moving towards these problem-solving, concept formation, understanding abstract concept, these type of skills that require more cognitive processing. And as we continue on this road, the other thing that always interests us is the further research on what is the best practice in ABA. And like I mentioned earlier, those randomized controlled trial studies, although the results are really promising, we should still point out that the sample size is still relatively low. Even with the second study that we presented with 60 participants, that's still relatively small sample size. As we continue to enroll and collaborate with more community partners and with different agencies and different school districts, we want to further kind of investigate how can we translate or disseminate the best practice that we know about ABA in more and more complex settings, and continue evaluating, does the finding that we discover, the research community discover, still holds true. And as we keep doing that, we also want to gradually introduce innovative ways of conducting these research. So like Jesse was mentioning, those neuromarkers. For example, can we continue using eye movement tracking in children with autism to investigate some areas of topics that historically are unable to be investigated? So for example, many providers, when they are running discrete trial trainings, often ask the question, should I use a real item during my teaching or should I use a picture of the item during my teaching? So there's a distinction between the 2D item and the 3D item. And then some people have different preferences. Instead of, am I going to use an actual photo of the item or should I use an animated photo of the item? And how exactly does that impact learners' ability to engage in either sequential discrimination or simultaneous discrimination when I'm presenting an array of items when I was doing master sample trial type of teaching? And eye tracking might be a way where we can really clearly differentiate the children's response in that area. And in the study that Jesse just presented, I mean, one of the potential reasons why we only see kind of like increase in eye fixation duration is that only during the conversation scenario, there are actually two individuals interacting with each other. So would it possibly be the case that relational training does facilitate this eye gaze pattern or eye tracking towards target stimuli, but when there is only one individual or one main area of focus that's presented on there, would it be the case that the effect are not that significant compared with there were two individuals interacting, so that I need to constantly shifting my eye gaze depending on who's the speaker and who's the listener? And again, all of these kind of more innovative and newer ways of conducting research enables us to kind of dive a little deeper in terms of outcome analysis of our treatment. And the other area that we are kind of exploring is to use neuroimaging techniques to identify those neural markers for ABA effectiveness. So continue building on this relational training thing that we've been mentioning over and over again during this presentation. There are evidence suggesting that when am I emitting a vocal utterance that is based on contingency, meaning that I've been prompted and essentially memorized how to respond in a certain situation, versus when my verbal utterance is nuanced and novel, meaning that I generated the speech and I produced this speech by cognitive processes. There are evidence showing that if you measure the brain activity and you measure the brain wave, there are actually distinctive patterns between contingency-based vocal utterance and the derivation-based verbal utterance. So it seems like different different neurological pathways are involved with these two different type of response. And going back to the data that we presented earlier, that we tend to see that children who are exposed to relational learning seems to be able to produce global level of change. We seems to be able to consistently see that across multiple domains of their skills, the cognitive processing, speech production, executive functioning, problem solving, etc., all of those areas start to show increase. So would it be possible that with relational training, we are actually impacting their behavior a little differently on the physiological level? Meaning that could it be possible that it's a different brain area that were activated during these tasks, or different neurological pathways that are involved with producing this behavior? Although the topography of the behavior might look exactly the same, but the underlying pathway, one might produce like a foundation for further skill development, but the impact on this area with the other approach is much more limited. And again, all these are really like exciting and new areas that we'd like to further explore with support of TAP and the university and different research partners. But we think that following this tradition of relational training and investigating how relational training impact global level skill production and self-control in terms of behavior reduction, we think that we are on a very exciting era of time where development of scientific methods are supporting these new endeavors. And now I'm going to turn it back to Dr. Dixon.
Thank you, John. And that about concludes our presentation for you today. We've left 5 minutes for questions from anybody that has any questions, comments about our work that we're doing and what we have done.
We did get one in the box in the Q&A, and I know, Mark, you answered it, but I think it's a good one. So I'm just going to say it out loud just so that everyone
Sure.
can hear it, because I think a lot of people might have this question. Are there prerequisite skills or specific criteria to effectively use relational training with people with ASD or intellectual disabilities?
Okay. I'll just wing my answer again instead of reciting it. But I mean, no, there are no prerequisite skills. Every child that we see that comes in for services, from age 2 onward, we integrate this into the fabric of what we do with them. If somebody is starting off with a very limited repertoire of significant challenging behaviors and no spoken vocal abilities, maybe no receptive skills, limited or zero eye contact, our trajectory of intervention is going to need to be, it's going to be slower than it would be for somebody that's coming in with a higher baseline of skills. But what we're talking about in this, this under this umbrella of relational training are things that kids can do, neurotypical kids can do at around 18 months to 2 years of age. And so if you look at, okay, is this child neurotypical around 18 months? Or is this 12-year-old neurotypical 18 months? The basics are there. And so, we don't see any, limitations to putting this into place. Now, again, the speed in which acquisition occurs is going to be different. But what you'll see, going down this path of these types of relational interventions is that the first connection, so to speak, the first, derivations, those little dotted arrows might take a little while. And then the next ones that you do take a little less, and the next ones you do take even less than that. So you're going to see this kind of, non-linear, but more exponential growth in the repertoire over time. So my recommendation is just be patient, to put this into practice, and 50 years of research showing that this can be done isn't wrong. And yes, BCBAs and your people got to learn new things, but we got these kids' lives in our hands. We owe it to them to do the best we can. And I think that what we're doing, at least right now, is the best. And I'm willing to say it won't be in 10 years because science keeps progressing. But right now we're chasing after some exciting outcomes, and I encourage you guys to try it as well.
Great, thank you. Another comment and question is, it's ironic that the Department of Defense is questioning outcomes when legislative policy often eliminates the public insurance pool from receiving ABA services. Does the mindfulness clinic work with those children covered by public insurance? And this person would suggest a very real argument could be made when looking at payment options versus outcome.
Yes, yeah, we do. We see everybody. And in terms of outcomes, they're equal across the board. I don't think we see a differentiation in outcome versus, or as a product of a payer. But what your question also brings into question, if we have these wonderful interventions that don't get to the people that need it, or get to enough people that need it, they're not that great of interventions. And so, and we don't have time to talk about all the things, that we do. And, but, one of my driving agenda items is, how do we take this stuff so that mom and dad can do it? Arranging those little diagrams, like, okay, you put your pictures here, you put your vocalizations here, those aren't that difficult of concepts to teach. And if we can, build capacity in families, and especially in schools, we won't be needing to rely so much on these BCBA people like us to do all the heavy lifting, but we spread the effects across many different caregivers in a child's life. And so you're right, these things can't be limited to a certain insurance company. They can't be limited to certain providers. And I'm trying as hard as I can to spread the effects.
Well, we greatly appreciate it. That's all the questions that we have. Thank you all for sharing your research and the exciting things to come. We're looking forward to it.